This was the kingdom of Julian Vance, a 42-year-old CEO whose name was a synonym for ruthless efficiency in the high-stakes world of international import-export. Julian didn't just walk through his office, he carved a path through it, his presence a silent command for deference. His suits were not merely clothes, they were declarations of status, tailored in London and costing more than the cars his employees drove. His posture was perfect, his gaze sharp and dismissive. He believed the world was a simple food chain, and he had fought, clawed, and inherited his way to the very top. The people who supported his reign, the administrative staff, the mailroom clerks, and especially the invisible cleaning crew, were, in his mind, little more than cogs in a machine, their individual identities irrelevant. They were functions, not faces. That Tuesday morning in March, a storm was brewing behind Julian's cool facade. The collapse of a multi-million-dollar deal in Singapore the week before had been a direct hit to his pride, a rare and infuriating stain on his record of invincibility. His frustration simmered just below the surface, searching for a release valve. He found it in the form of Elena Morales. Elena, at 43, was the antithesis of Julian's world. She wore a simple, functional blue uniform that had faded slightly with countless washes. Her movements were quiet and deliberate, honed by years of trying to remain unnoticed. She was in the middle of the main hallway, replacing the liner in a large, stainless steel trash receptacle. For a fleeting moment, she was an obstacle in Julian's direct path to his corner office. "Get out of the way," Julian's voice cut through the morning quiet, not with a shout, but with a low, sharp command that was far more menacing. "Some of us have a business to run." He didn't break his stride. He simply shoved her heavy cleaning cart with the corner of his expensive leather briefcase. It wasn't a violent push, but it was dismissive, contemptuous. The cart wobbled, and a spray bottle of glass cleaner clattered to the polished marble floor. Elena's hands shot out to steady the cart, her heart giving a familiar, painful jolt. She didn't look up. She couldn't. "My apologies, Mr. Vance," she murmured to his retreating back, her voice barely a whisper. She had worked at the firm for 2 years, and in that time she had mastered the art of becoming part of the scenery. "Sarah!" The name was a bark, echoing the moment Julian's office door swung open. His corner office was a monument to his ego, a vast space of glass and steel with a panoramic view of Lake Michigan. Sarah, his executive assistant for 8 years, materialized at his door with the practiced speed of someone used to anticipating explosions. "What have I said about the cleaning staff?" Julian demanded, throwing his briefcase onto the massive desk. "I don't want to see them. I don't want to smell their cheap cleaning products. They are a visual disruption. It lowers the tone of the entire floor. Fix it." Sarah's face was a mask of calm professionalism. "Of course, Mr. Vance. I will speak with their supervisor again." She knew it was a futile exercise. The cleaning schedule had been rearranged multiple times to accommodate his whims. The issue wasn't the schedule. It was Julian's fundamental belief that people like Elena shouldn't exist in his line of sight. From the hallway, where she was retrieving the fallen bottle, Elena heard it all. The words were no longer sharp daggers. They were a dull, chronic pain, a constant reminder of her place in this world. She didn't sigh. She didn't frown. She simply absorbed the humiliation, filed it away with all the others, and continued her work. The oppressive rhythm of the morning was suddenly shattered by the arrival of a special courier. He wasn't from a standard delivery service. He wore a crisp uniform and carried a locked briefcase. He requested Julian's signature personally, handing over a thick, rigid envelope bearing a wax seal and a flurry of international stamps. The return address was a prestigious law firm in Prague, Czech Republic. Intrigued, Julian dismissed the courier and tore it open. Inside, he found not a letter, but a dense, multi-page document. The text was a forest of unfamiliar characters, a chaotic dance of consonants and accent marks that his mind refused to process. "What in God's name is this?" he muttered, the paper feeling alien in his hands. He buzzed his intercom. "Sarah, get in here. Now." He thrust the papers at her. "Tell me this is a joke." Sarah took the documents, her trained eyes immediately scanning for context. She noted the heavy, watermarked paper, the embossed seals, the formal letterhead. "Mr. Vance," she said, her voice even. "The letterhead is from Advokatní kancelář Dvořák, one of the oldest law firms in Prague. The seals are official. This is a legitimate legal document." She pointed to a specific section. "And based on the formatting, It appears to be written in Czech. Julian let out a short, incredulous laugh. Czech? Who communicates in Czech? Are we doing business with a nation of chimney sweeps? This has to be a scam, some new sophisticated phishing attempt. His confidence, however, was a thin veneer. Sarah gently directed his attention to a line near the bottom of the first page. He didn't need to understand the words to recognize the euro symbol, WUM, followed by a number with 7 zeros. And next to it, a deadline, written in a universal format, 5 Rus p.m. Today. A cold knot formed in Julian's stomach. The number was too large to ignore. The deadline was too close for comfort. Find a translator, he commanded, his voice losing its mocking tone and gaining a sharp edge of panic. I don't care what it costs. Get me someone who can read this, now. The race had begun, and Julian Vance, a man who controlled every aspect of his life, was about to discover he was no longer in the driver's seat. Julian's command, sharp with an undertone of barely concealed panic, sent a ripple of urgency through the 75th floor. Sarah became a whirlwind of focused efficiency, her fingers flying across her keyboard, her phone seemingly glued to her ear. She was a master of sourcing the impossible, a skill honed by years of catering to Julian's every whim. But this request was different. This wasn't about securing a last-minute reservation at an exclusive restaurant or chartering a private jet. This was about finding a highly specialized, certified legal translator for a non-mainstream language and needing them on-site within the hour. Her first calls were to the city's top-tier translation services, firms that boasted of their global reach and rapid response times. The answer, however, was a consistent and disheartening chorus of polite refusals. Check legal documents. That's a very specific skill set, Ms. Reed, one account manager explained patiently. Our certified Czech translator is based in Minneapolis, and there's no way to get him to Chicago and have him review the documents before the end of the day. I'm very sorry. Another agency offered a non-certified translator who could provide a gist of the document, an offer Sarah knew Julian would meet with a volcanic eruption of fury. She moved on to academia, calling the Slavic Languages Department at the University of Chicago, then Northwestern. She was met with voicemail, out-of-office replies, and professors who, while sympathetic, explained that academic translation was a world away from the high-stakes, time-sensitive nature of a legal document that could be worth millions. With every dead end, the atmosphere in Julian's office grew more toxic. He paced the length of his panoramic window, the stunning view of the city skyline lost on him. He was a man accustomed to bending the world to his will, and the world's refusal to cooperate was an infuriating personal affront. Nothing? He would bark every time Sarah ended a call. You found absolutely nothing? In a global hub like Chicago? It's incompetence, utter incompetence. He wasn't just angry, he was terrified. The number on that page had burned itself into his mind, a tantalizing glimpse of a fortune that was now threatening to evaporate into thin air because of something as trivial as language. The drama of the CEO's office began to leak into the wider workspace. The low hum of productivity was replaced by hushed whispers and furtive glances. The story of the mysterious document and the CEO's unraveling temper became the day's main event. A few ambitious junior associates, sensing a potential opportunity to be heroes, huddled together, using their smartphones to try and decipher the text. They aimed their cameras at a copy of the document, and the translation apps sputtered out a nonsensical word salad of inheritance, castle, uncle, and goat. Their efforts only added to the sense of futility. The situation escalated when Amanda, the pragmatic head of the finance department, gathered her courage and entered Julian's office. Julian, she said, using his first name, a privilege reserved for a select few. I've seen this happen before in an international acquisition. These deadlines on estate documents are not suggestions. They are ironclad. If you miss it, the assets are typically forfeited to the state by default. There are no appeals. Julian stared at her, his face pale. He looked at his watch. It was 1:45 p.m. The walls of his glass office suddenly felt like they were closing in. It was at this moment, cornered by his own powerlessness, that Julian's arrogance staged a coup. If he was going to be defeated, he would be defeated on his own terms, in a spectacle of his own making. He stormed out of his office and planted himself in the center of the open plan workspace. The whispering stopped instantly. Every eye was on him. He held up the check document like a captured enemy flag. "Attention, everyone!" his voice boomed. dripping with theatricality. "As you can see, our entire multi-million-dollar operation has been brought to a standstill by a piece of paper written in a language that time forgot." He paused, letting the tension build, his eyes sweeping across the faces of his employees. His gaze snagged on Elena, who was quietly wiping down a filing cabinet in the far corner, trying to remain invisible. A cruel, ugly idea began to form in his mind. "So, let's make this a little more interesting," he continued. "I am officially offering my entire monthly salary, $45,000, to the genius in this room who can make sense of this gibberish." A wave of nervous energy washed over the room. The figure was staggering, and the offer was absurd. It was a performance. He was turning his failure into a display of his own wealth, showing that even his monthly pay was a life-changing sum for them. The tension broke, and a few sycophantic laughs rippled through the crowd. "For that kind of money, I'll become fluent by 5 o'clock, shouted a young man from the sales team, eager to please the boss. The laughter grew louder, but Julian wasn't finished. He turned his body, making sure everyone saw who he was looking at. He pointed a perfectly manicured finger directly at Elena. "The offer is open to all," he declared, his voice laced with venomous mockery. "Even you, Elena. What do you say? You could buy a lifetime supply of floor wax with that, couldn't you? Or perhaps you'd like to give it a try. I'm sure your deep knowledge of Slavic languages is just waiting to be discovered." The public-targeted humiliation was so brutal it sucked the air out of the room. The laughter died in people's throats, replaced by an uncomfortable shuffle. In the midst of this cruel circus, Elena stood frozen. She had been listening, observing, and as her eyes focused on the document in his hand, she felt a jolt of recognition so profound it almost buckled her knees. It wasn't just a document, it was a key. And she, the invisible woman, was the only person in the building who knew how to turn it. The silence that descended upon the 75th floor was a physical entity, a heavy blanket that smothered every sound. The forced laughter, the nervous shuffling, the hum of the ventilation system, all of it vanished. More than 50 employees stood frozen, their eyes locked on the cleaning lady who had just committed an act of unthinkable corporate defiance. Julian Vance himself was momentarily stunned into speechlessness. His face, which had been a mask of smug cruelty, was now a canvas of pure, unadulterated disbelief. He stared at Elena as if she had just sprouted a second head. "You... what?" He finally managed to stammer, the words catching in his throat. He had expected her to shrink, to flee, to dissolve into the background as she always did. He had not expected this. Elena did not flinch under the collective gaze of the entire office. She took another deliberate step forward, moving out from the relative anonymity of the corner and into the full, unforgiving light of the main floor. Something fundamental in her bearing had shifted. The slump in her shoulders was gone, replaced by a straight, dignified posture. She lifted her chin, and for the first time, she met Julian's stare directly, her own eyes clear and unwavering. "I said," she repeated, her voice calm and measured, devoid of any tremor or fear, "that I can translate the documents for you, sir. I am fluent in the Czech language." The second pronouncement, delivered with such quiet confidence, sent a new wave of shock through the room. This was no longer a misunderstanding. This was an assertion. The absurdity of the situation was so profound that Julian's brain defaulted back to ridicule, his only defense mechanism against the incomprehensible. A loud barking laugh erupted from his chest, but it sounded hollow this time, brittle. "Ha! This is priceless, absolutely priceless." He turned to his audience, a desperate ringmaster trying to keep control of his circus. "Did you all hear that? Elena, our resident sanitation expert, is also a linguistic prodigy. What other hidden talents do you have? Can you perform open-heart surgery with a dustpan?" He was met with a few weak, sycophantic chuckles, but most of the staff remained silent, their curiosity now overriding their fear. There was something about Elena's composure that was deeply unsettling. It wasn't the act of a fool. It was the act of someone who knew something no one else did. "I am not joking, Mr. Vance," Elena said, her voice cutting cleanly through his mockery. "The deadline is in less than 3 hours. Every minute you waste insulting me is a minute you are losing. If you want to claim your inheritance, you will listen to me." The word inheritance struck Julian like a physical blow. How could she possibly know that? He hadn't said it. No one had. Was it a lucky guess? Or was she actually reading the document from across the room? The seed of doubt that had been planted earlier now began to sprout with alarming speed. He looked at her again, really looked at her, for the first time in 2 years. He saw not just a uniform, but the woman inside it. He saw the intelligence in her eyes, the lines of hardship around her mouth, and a formidable, unbreakable stillness. "Listen, Elena," he said, his tone shifting, attempting to regain control through condescension. "I admire your gumption, really, but these are highly complex legal papers. This isn't like ordering a coffee. Why don't you go back to your duties and let the adults handle this?" But Elena stood her ground. "You made a public offer, Mr. Vance. $45,000 to anyone who could solve your problem. I am the only one who has offered a solution. Are you withdrawing your offer in front of your entire staff?" It was a perfectly executed trap. To back down now would be to admit defeat, to show his entire company that his grand, arrogant gesture was nothing but hot air. He was cornered. "Fine," he snarled, the word tearing from his throat. He was a cornered animal, lashing out. "You want to make a fool of yourself? Be my guest, but do it quickly." He snatched the documents from his own desk and slammed them down on a nearby conference table with a loud crack. "There, the stage is yours, Professor. Dazzle us with your brilliance." The sarcasm was thick enough to taste, but it was his last line of defense. Isabel walked to the table, her steps measured and even. The entire office held its breath. She picked up the papers, not with the fumbling uncertainty of a novice, but with the familiar ease of an expert. Her eyes scanned the first page, and a subtle transformation took place. A lifetime of weariness seemed to fall away from her shoulders. A light, long extinguished, rekindled behind her eyes. It was the look of a master returning to her craft. She cleared her throat, and then she began to read. "Vážený Payne Vance," she began. Her pronunciation was flawless, the melodic, complex sounds of the Czech language filling the sterile office air with an unexpected beauty. The fluency was absolute, undeniable. It was impossible to fake. "Píšeme vám, abychom vás informovali o právním stavu dědictví, které zanechal váš prastrýc, Josef Novák, jenž zemřel v Praze dne 15. února tohoto roku." She paused, looked directly at Julian, and translated into perfect formal English. "Dear Mr. Vance, we are writing to inform you of the legal status of the inheritance left by your great-uncle, Josef Novak, who passed away in Prague on the 15th of February of this year." Julian Vance's jaw went slack. His face, moments before a mask of derision, was now a portrait of utter, world-shattering shock. "Continue," he commanded, but the word came out as a strangled, powerless whisper. The boardroom-like silence of the main office floor was now charged with a new kind of tension. It was no longer the tense energy of a corporate crisis, but the awestruck hush of a congregation witnessing a miracle. As Elena continued to translate, her voice remained a steady, professional anchor in a sea of disbelief. She moved through the dense legal text with the effortless grace of a seasoned navigator charting a familiar course. She didn't just read the words, she interpreted them, pausing to clarify complex points of Czech probate law, explaining the nuances of the inheritance tax code, and defining obscure legal terms. She was not merely a translator, she was a master, demonstrating a level of expertise that was both dazzling and deeply intimidating. "The estate," she continued, her eyes scanning the second page, "is comprised of several key assets. These include 3 residential properties in Prague's Old Town, a controlling interest in a historic Bohemian glass manufacturing company, and a diversified stock portfolio managed by a Swiss bank. The total estimated value, after preliminary appraisal, is 15 million euros. A collective, involuntary gasp swept through the room. The number was so immense it seemed fictional. Julian, who had sunk into a nearby chair, looked as though he had been physically struck. The fortune he had been chasing blindly was real, and its existence was being revealed to him by the woman he considered less than dirt. "However," Elena said, her tone becoming more serious as she turned to the final page, "the will contains a critical stipulation. It is a clause of personal acceptance. It requires you, as the sole heir, to confirm receipt of this notification via a formal notarized response, which must be dispatched by express courier before midnight, Chicago time. Failure to comply, even by a single minute, will trigger an irrevocable clause that transfers the entire estate to the Czech National Heritage and Arts Foundation. There are no provisions for appeal. When she finished, she carefully squared the papers and placed them on the table. She looked up, her calm gaze falling upon Julian. The powerful CEO seemed to have shrunk, his expensive suit suddenly looking like a costume that was too big for him. How? He finally managed to ask, the single word encompassing a universe of confusion. How is any of this possible? Elena allowed herself a small, weary sigh, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of years of unspoken frustration. Before I cleaned floors for a living, Mr. Vance, I was a tenured professor of Slavic languages and literatures at the University of Chicago, she explained, her voice even and devoid of self-pity. I held that position for 15 years. My doctoral thesis was on the linguistic evolution of 20th century Czech legal texts. The revelation landed with the force of a physical shockwave. Sarah, the assistant, was the first to find her voice. What happened? Why would you leave a job like that? A shadow passed over Elena's face. I didn't leave. I was forced out. I discovered that the head of my department had built his career on plagiarized work. I reported him through the official channels. The university, fearing a scandal, chose to protect him. They buried my report and began a campaign to discredit me, citing collegial disruption and institutional friction. My contract was not renewed. My name was quietly passed around academic circles. I was blacklisted. With a sick husband and a daughter in college, I couldn't afford to be unemployed. This was the first job I could find that would hire me without asking for academic references. The story, told with such stark, unadorned dignity, filled the room with a profound sense of shame. The employees who had laughed at her just an hour ago now stared at the floor, unable to meet her eyes. Julian, however, was still grappling with the last vestiges of his pride. His world had been turned upside topsy-turvy, and his ego was fighting for survival. Even if that's true, he stammered, how do I know you're not exaggerating the numbers, making this all up to what? Elena's expression remained unreadable. Mr. Vance, before I entered academia, I supplemented my income by working as a certified translator for the Czech consulate in this city. I still know the cultural attaché. I can call his private number right now and have him verbally confirm the legitimacy of this law firm and the general nature of these documents. Would you like me to do that? She reached into the pocket of her uniform and pulled out an old non-smart cell phone. The simple, confident gesture was the final blow. It was not a bluff. Julian's last wall of defense crumbled into dust. He was utterly and completely at her mercy. What do you want? He asked, his voice hoarse. For the translation. For helping me. Elena looked at him, her gaze level and piercing. You already made the offer, Mr. Vance. In front of everyone. Your monthly salary. $45,000. Julian nodded numbly. The sum he had thrown out as a cruel joke was now the price of his salvation. It's yours, he said. But everything. The response. It has to be perfect. It has to be ready before the deadline. It will be, Elena assured him. I require the use of the main boardroom, a computer with a secure internet connection, a high-quality printer, and absolute privacy. Still dazed, Julian could only nod and instruct Sarah to provide whatever she needed. As Elena walked towards the boardroom, she moved with a grace and purpose that no one had ever seen in her before. She was no longer a janitor. She was a scholar, a professional reclaiming her domain. Less than an hour later, she emerged. She walked directly to Julian's desk and placed a meticulously prepared folder in front of him. The complete annotated translation of the original document, she announced crisply. A formally drafted letter of acceptance in perfect legal Czech, ready for your signature, and a preliminary power of attorney authorization for the Prague law firm to begin the process on your behalf. You need to sign here and here. The work was flawless, a masterpiece of legal and linguistic precision. Numbly, Julian signed where she indicated. The payment, Mr. Vance, Elena said, her voice neutral as she slid a small piece of paper with her bank account details across the desk. With trembling fingers, Julian accessed his personal bank account on his computer and executed the transfer. A moment later, a notification pinged softly on Elena's old phone. She glanced at it, then met his eyes one last time. Thank you, she said, the words polite but cold. Now, if you'll excuse me, my shift isn't over. She turned, walked over to the hallway where she had left her cart, and resumed her work, leaving Julian Vance alone in his glass tower, a newly minted multi-millionaire, utterly broken by the quiet, unassailable dignity of the woman he had tried so hard to erase. So, What do you think of the lesson he learned? Tell me in the comments what you would have done. If you love stories like this, subscribe now so you don't miss the next one.